World War II. How it began. Chapter 1. The Seeds of Conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on the 28th of June, 1919, marked the end of World War I and aimed to establish a framework for peace. However, its terms were harsh and punitive, particularly towards Germany, which was held responsible for the war. The imposition of heavy reparations and territorial losses created a sense of humiliation and resentment among the German populace, laying the groundwork for future conflicts. The treaty's provisions included the disarmament of Germany, limiting its army to 100,000 troops and prohibiting the possession of certain weapons. This military restriction not only weakened Germany but also contributed to a feeling of insecurity among its citizens. The resulting economic turmoil, exacerbated by the reparations, led to widespread dissatisfaction and unrest, fostering an environment ripe for extremist ideologies. Additionally, the Treaty of Versailles redrew the map of Europe, creating new nations and altering borders with little regard for ethnic and historical contexts. This shift caused tensions in various regions, particularly where minority populations found themselves in newly formed states. Such discontent would later manifest in nationalist movements, contributing to the instability of interwar Europe. The League of Nations, established as part of the treaty, aimed to prevent future conflicts through diplomacy and collective security. However, its effectiveness was limited, as major powers like the United States refused to join, undermining its authority. The failure of the League to address issues arising from the treaty further illustrated the inadequacies of the post-war settlement. Ultimately, the Treaty of Versailles is often cited as a significant factor in the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The resentment it fostered in Germany, coupled with the economic hardships of the 1920s and 1930s, created a fertile ground for the ideas of revanchism and militarism. Thus, the treaty not only shaped the immediate post-war landscape, but also planted the seeds for the catastrophic events of World War II. Economic turmoil in Europe. The economic landscape of Europe in the interwar years was marked by severe turmoil and instability. Following the devastation of World War I, many nations struggled to rebuild their economies, facing high unemployment rates and rampant inflation. Countries like Germany were particularly affected, as the Treaty of Versailles imposed heavy reparations that crippled their financial systems. This economic distress created fertile ground for political extremism and social unrest, as citizens sought solutions to their dire circumstances. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, exacerbated these economic woes across the continent. As global markets collapsed, European nations saw a dramatic rise in poverty and despair. Governments struggled to respond effectively, often resorting to protectionist policies that further isolated their economies. This period of economic isolationism not only deepened the crisis but also stoked nationalist sentiments, as countries looked inward for solutions rather than cooperating with their neighbors. In Germany, the economic turmoil directly contributed to the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Promising to restore national pride and economic stability, Hitler's rhetoric resonated with a populace desperate for change. The Nazi regime capitalized on the widespread discontent, utilizing propaganda to blame external forces for Germany's plight. This shift in power dynamics would set the stage for aggressive expansionist policies that ultimately led to the outbreak of World War II. Additionally, the economic conditions in Italy facilitated the ascent of Benito Mussolini, who similarly exploited public discontent. His fascist regime aimed to create a new Roman Empire, appealing to nationalistic fervor while promising economic recovery. The alignment of economic instability with authoritarian regimes across Europe demonstrated how fragile democracies could become under pressure, paving the way for totalitarian rule. Ultimately, the economic turmoil in Europe during the interwar period was not merely a backdrop to the rise of totalitarian regimes but a crucial factor in the ignition of World War II. The desperation felt by millions created an environment ripe for conflict, as nations turned to aggressive nationalism and militarization in a bid for survival. Understanding this connection between economic hardship and political extremism is essential to grasp the complexities that led to one of history's most devastating wars. The rise of totalitarian regimes. The rise of totalitarian regimes in the early 20th century was a significant precursor to the outbreak of World War II. These regimes often emerged in the aftermath of economic instability and social upheaval, capitalizing on the discontent of the masses. Prominent examples include Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany and Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy, both of which promised national rejuvenation and unity, but delivered oppression and aggression. Totalitarianism is characterized by the centralization of power, where the state seeks to control every aspect of public and private life. Propaganda was a key tool used by these regimes to manipulate public opinion and suppress dissent. Through state-controlled media and education, leaders instilled a sense of loyalty and fanaticism among their citizens, effectively silencing any opposition that could threaten their authority. Moreover, totalitarian regimes often employed brutal tactics to maintain control, including censorship, surveillance, and political purges. The fear of persecution kept many citizens compliant, while those who dared to resist faced severe consequences. This climate of fear not only stifled individual freedoms but also fostered an environment ripe for militarism and expansionism, as leaders sought to distract from domestic issues by focusing on external enemies. The aggressive foreign policies of totalitarian states significantly contributed to the tensions that ultimately ignited World War II. For instance, Hitler sought to expand German territory under the guise of reclaiming lands lost after World War I. Similarly, Mussolini aimed to revive the Roman Empire by invading Ethiopia, showcasing the willingness of totalitarian leaders to use military force to achieve their goals. In conclusion, the rise of totalitarian regimes reflected a broader trend of authoritarianism that was both a cause and consequence of the geopolitical landscape leading up to World War II. Their ideologies not only reshaped national identities but also set the stage for global conflict, as these regimes pursued aggressive agendas that disregarded peace and diplomacy. The echoes of this tumultuous period remind us of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of safeguarding democratic values. Chapter 2: The Road to War. Expansionist policies of Germany. The expansionist policies of Germany in the lead-up to World War II were characterized by aggressive territorial ambitions that aimed to overturn the post-World War I settlement. Under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi regime pursued a vision of Lebensraum, or living space, which sought to acquire vast territories in Eastern Europe. This ideology was rooted in a belief that the German people required more land to thrive, and that this could be achieved through conquest. The annexation of Austria in 1938 was a pivotal moment, marking the beginning of a series of aggressive moves that would ultimately lead to war. The failures of appeasement. The policy of appeasement, particularly in the lead-up to World War II, is often regarded as a monumental failure in diplomatic history. Following the devastation of World War I, many European leaders sought to avoid further conflict by conceding to the demands of aggressive powers, notably Nazi Germany. This strategy was predicated on the belief that satisfying Hitler's territorial ambitions would maintain peace and stability in Europe. However, this miscalculation ultimately emboldened the Axis powers and set the stage for a broader conflict. One of the most significant examples of appeasement was the Munich Agreement of 1938, where British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French leaders allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain famously returned to Britain proclaiming that the agreement had secured peace for our time. Yet, this false sense of security only encouraged further aggression from Hitler, who perceived the lack of resistance as an invitation to pursue additional territorial gains. The failures of appeasement were not solely limited to the Munich Agreement. The Western powers' reluctance to confront Hitler when he remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, or when he annexed Austria in 1938, demonstrated a pattern of inaction that emboldened Nazi expansionism. Each concession made by the Allies reinforced Hitler's belief that he could operate without significant opposition, ultimately leading to the invasion of Poland in 1939 and the onset of World War II. Critics of appeasement argue that it reflected a profound misunderstanding of totalitarian regimes and their objectives. Rather than seeking a diplomatic resolution, leaders like Hitler were driven by expansionist ideologies and a desire for dominance. The failure to recognize this fundamental truth resulted in catastrophic consequences, as it allowed totalitarian regimes to grow stronger while democratic nations hesitated to act decisively against them. In retrospect, the policy of appeasement serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of compromising with aggressive powers. The lessons learned from this period highlight the necessity of vigilance and resolve in international relations, particularly when faced with threats to peace and stability. The echoes of these decisions resonate through history, reminding us that the pursuit of peace must not come at the expense of justice and security. The role of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was established in the aftermath of World War I, with the primary aim of promoting peace and cooperation among nations. It was a response to the devastation of the war and sought to prevent future conflicts through dialogue and diplomacy. The League's formation was a significant step towards international governance, representing a collective effort to maintain global stability after a period of unprecedented violence. Despite its noble intentions, the League of Nations faced numerous challenges that ultimately hindered its effectiveness. Key powers, most notably the United States, chose not to join, which weakened its authority and influence. Additionally, the League struggled with enforcement. It lacked a military force and relied heavily on the goodwill of member states to comply with its resolutions. This limitation became evident as aggressive actions by countries like Italy and Japan went unchecked, undermining the League's credibility. The 1930s witnessed a series of crises that tested the League's resolve. The invasion of Manchuria by Japan in 1931 was a pivotal moment, revealing the League's inability to act decisively. Despite condemning the aggression, the League could not mobilize effective sanctions or military intervention, leading to a perception of impotence. Such failures contributed to the rise of totalitarian regimes in Europe, as nations began to doubt the League's capacity to maintain peace. As tensions escalated in Europe, the League became increasingly marginalized. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party marked a significant turning point, as Germany withdrew from the League and pursued an aggressive expansionist policy. The League's inability to address the rearmament of Germany and its annexation of territories illustrated its diminishing relevance in a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. This further emboldened other nations to pursue their own ambitions without regard for international agreements. In retrospect, the League of Nations serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of international diplomacy. While it laid the groundwork for future organizations, such as the United Nations, its failures highlight the necessity of strong political will and cooperation among nations. The League's legacy is a testament to the challenges of maintaining peace in a world rife with competing interests and ideologies, ultimately setting the stage for the outbreak of World War II. Chapter 3. The Spanish Civil War. Ideological Battleground. The ideological battleground of the 1930s set the stage for the eruption of World War II, as nations grappled with competing visions of governance and society. The rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan presented a stark contrast to the democratic ideals upheld by Western powers. This clash of ideologies created a volatile environment, where the ambitions of aggressive leaders were met with the fears and uncertainties of a world still recovering from the devastation of the First World War. In Germany, Adolf Hitler's National Socialist ideology sought to establish a racially pure state, promoting extreme nationalism and militarism. This ideology not only justified aggressive territorial expansion but also led to the systematic persecution of minorities, particularly Jews, who were scapegoated for the nation's woes. Hitler's vision resonated with many Germans who felt betrayed by the Treaty of Versailles, fueling a desire for revenge and revival that would ultimately lead to conflict. Meanwhile, in Italy, Benito Mussolini championed fascism, advocating for a strong, centralized state that rejected liberal democracy. His regime glorified war as a means to national rejuvenation, and Mussolini's ambitions in Africa and the Mediterranean further strained relations with other European powers. The ideological fervor of fascism and its promise of national strength appealed to those disillusioned by economic instability and social unrest, making Italy a key player in the impending conflict. Across the globe, Japan's militaristic expansion was driven by a belief in its divine right to dominate Asia. The Japanese military's ideology of superiority and manifest destiny led to aggressive actions in China and the Pacific, igniting tensions with Western powers. As Japan sought to establish its empire, the ideological battle lines were drawn, pitting the imperial ambitions of the Japanese against the democratic principles of the United States and its allies. The culmination of these ideological conflicts created an environment ripe for war. The failure of diplomatic efforts and appeasement policies only emboldened the aggressors, as nations struggled to reconcile their conflicting beliefs. In this ideological battleground, the stage was set for World War II, as countries were forced to confront the stark reality of a world divided by competing ideologies and the inevitability of armed conflict. International involvement. The international involvement in the lead-up to World War II was marked by a complex interplay of diplomacy, alliances, and conflicts that shaped the global landscape. Following the devastation of World War I, many nations were eager to avoid further conflict. However, the rise of aggressive regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan created a volatile environment where diplomatic efforts often fell short. The League of Nations, established to promote peace, struggled to enforce its resolutions and prevent aggression, leading to a sense of disillusionment among member states. As tensions escalated in the 1930s, countries began to form alliances that would ultimately play a crucial role in the war's outbreak. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, sought to expand their territories, often through military conquest. In contrast, the Allies, including France, Britain, and later the United States, attempted to contain this aggression. The failure of appeasement policies, exemplified by the Munich Agreement of 1938, illustrated the limits of diplomatic efforts in curbing totalitarian ambitions. The Spanish Civil War, 1936-1939, served as a precursor to the larger conflict, drawing in international involvement from various factions and nations. It became a battleground for ideological struggles between fascism and communism, with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy supporting the nationalists, while the Soviet Union backed the Republicans. This conflict highlighted the global stakes involved and foreshadowed the alliances that would take shape during World War II. Moreover, economic factors played a significant role in international relations leading up to the war. The Great Depression had left many countries in dire financial straits, leading to social unrest and the rise of extremist political movements. Nations like Germany exploited these economic hardships to galvanize support for militaristic agendas, ultimately leading to an arms race that would further escalate tensions. The resulting economic instability made diplomatic solutions increasingly elusive. In conclusion, the international involvement in the events leading up to World War II was characterized by failed diplomacy, shifting alliances, and the complex interplay of ideology and economics. The inability of nations to effectively collaborate in the face of rising aggression not only paved the way for the war but also demonstrated the profound impact of global relations on historical events. Understanding these dynamics is crucial to grasping how the echoes of the past continue to resonate in contemporary international affairs. Lessons learned. The lessons learned from the ignition of World War II are profound and multifaceted. One key lesson revolves around the dangers of appeasement and the belief that aggressive powers could be placated through diplomatic concessions. The failure of European leaders to confront the expansionist ambitions of Adolf Hitler in the 1930s demonstrated how such policies can embolden aggressors, ultimately leading to catastrophic conflict. This pivotal moment in history serves as a stark reminder of the importance of taking a firm stand against tyranny rather than fostering false hopes of peace through compromise. Another significant lesson is the critical role of collective security in maintaining peace. The League of Nations, established after World War I, was intended to prevent future conflicts through cooperation among nations. However, its ineffectiveness highlighted the necessity for a more robust international system capable of responding decisively to threats. The absence of strong alliances and the reluctance of nations to commit to mutual defense left the world vulnerable and contributed to the outbreak of war. Moreover, the economic turmoil of the interwar period cannot be overlooked as a catalyst for conflict. The Great Depression had devastating effects on economies worldwide, leading to widespread instability and discontent. This environment provided fertile ground for extremist ideologies to flourish, as desperate populations sought radical solutions to their suffering. Understanding the link between economic hardship and political extremism is crucial for preventing future conflicts. Additionally, the lessons learned about propaganda and public perception are invaluable. The Nazi regime's mastery of propaganda played a critical role in shaping public opinion and justifying their militaristic and expansionist policies. The manipulation of information and the creation of a narrative that painted opponents as threats to national security showcased the power of media in swaying the masses. Recognizing the influence of propaganda is essential for fostering informed citizenry and countering misinformation in contemporary society. Finally, the importance of historical memory and education cannot be overstated. The horrors of World War II serve as a potent reminder of the consequences of unchecked aggression, intolerance, and hatred. By studying the origins of the war and the choices made by leaders, future generations can learn to recognize the warning signs of conflict and work towards a more peaceful and just world. Preserving the lessons of the past is vital for ensuring that history does not repeat itself. Chapter 4. The Axis Powers Unite. The Pact of Steel. The Pact of Steel, formerly known as the Pact of Friendship and Alliance between Germany and Italy, was signed on the 22nd of May, 1939. This agreement solidified the alliance between the two nations, marking a significant step in the lead up to World War II. With the rise of fascism in Italy under Mussolini and Nazism in Germany under Hitler, this pact represented a mutual commitment to support each other politically and militarily. It was a clear indication of the expanding Axis powers and their intentions to challenge the existing global order. The implications of the Pact of Steel were profound. Both leaders viewed the agreement as a means to counter the threat posed by the Allies, particularly France and Britain. By aligning their military strategies and resources, Germany and Italy aimed to enhance their influence in Europe and beyond. The pact also intended to deter any potential intervention from other nations, thus emboldening their aggressive expansionist policies in the years that followed. In the wake of the pact, diplomatic tensions escalated across Europe. The alliance between Germany and Italy not only signaled a shift in the balance of power but also foreshadowed the catastrophic events that would soon unfold. Other nations began to take notice, with Britain and France realizing that their appeasement strategies had failed to contain the ambitions of the Axis powers. The Pact of Steel was a pivotal moment, driving a wedge between the Axis and Allied nations. As the war progressed, the limitations of the Pact of Steel became apparent. While the initial military cooperation was significant, both nations had differing objectives that often clashed. Italy's military failures in Greece and North Africa exposed the vulnerabilities of the alliance. Hitler's growing ambitions and the rapid successes of the Wehrmacht overshadowed Italy's contributions, leading to frustration and resentment within the Italian leadership. Ultimately, the Pact of Steel exemplified the complexities of alliances during World War II. While it initially strengthened the Axis powers, it also highlighted the fragility of such agreements when national interests diverged. The impact of the pact reverberated throughout the war, influencing strategies and outcomes, and serving as a reminder of how alliances can shape the course of history, for better or worse. The Tripartite Pact. The Tripartite Pact, signed on September 27, 1940, marked a significant turning point in the alliances of World War II. This agreement brought together Germany, Italy, and Japan, forming a military coalition that would challenge the Allied powers. The pact was not merely a strategic alliance, it represented the ideological unity of fascist regimes, with each member sharing a vision of territorial expansion and dominance. As tensions escalated globally, this coalition would play a crucial role in shaping the course of the war. Under the terms of the Tripartite Pact, each signatory pledged mutual support in the event of an attack by a nation not already involved in the war. This commitment was primarily aimed at deterring the United States from entering the conflict, as the Axis powers sought to consolidate their gains across Europe and Asia. The pact effectively signaled to potential adversaries that any aggression towards one would be met with a united response, thereby heightening the stakes of international diplomacy. The Tripartite Pact was also significant in the context of military operations. It allowed for coordinated strategies among the Axis powers, facilitating joint military campaigns and the sharing of resources. This cooperation was evident in various theaters of the war, particularly in Europe and the Pacific, where the three nations sought to exploit their combined strengths against the Allies. Such collaboration illustrated the depth of their commitment to the pact and their shared ambition for global supremacy. However, the alliance was not without its challenges. Cultural differences and conflicting military objectives sometimes strained relations between the signatory nations. For instance, Japan's ambitions in Asia often clashed with Germany's objectives in Europe, leading to a lack of cohesive strategy. Despite these tensions, the Tripartite Pact remained a central element of Axis strategy until the tide of the war began to turn against them. Ultimately, the Tripartite Pact exemplified the dangerous alliances that emerged in the lead-up to and during World War II. It served as a reminder of how ideological bonds can shape geopolitical landscapes, often with catastrophic consequences. As the war progressed, the effectiveness of this pact waned, foreshadowing the eventual downfall of the Axis powers and the realignment of global alliances in the post-war era. Military strategies and objectives. The military strategies and objectives that emerged in the lead-up to World War II were shaped by a complex interplay of political ambitions, economic factors, and historical grievances. As nations grappled with the aftermath of World War I, many sought to revise borders and expand their empires. This desire for territorial expansion was particularly evident in Germany, Italy, and Japan, where leaders embraced militaristic ideologies to assert their dominance on the global stage. These strategies were not merely about conquest, they were deeply rooted in the belief that national strength could be achieved through military prowess. In Germany, Adolf Hitler's regime exemplified the aggressive military strategies that would later define the early years of World War II. The concept of blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was central to the German approach, combining fast-moving and coordinated attacks using infantry, tanks, and air support. This strategy not only aimed to overwhelm opponents quickly but also sought to instill a sense of fear and disarray among enemy forces. The swift successes of the German army in Poland and France showcased the effectiveness of this strategy, allowing Hitler to rapidly expand his influence across Europe. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan was pursuing its own military objectives, driven by a desire for resources and regional dominance. The Japanese strategy involved a combination of naval power and ground assaults, culminating in the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. This surprise assault aimed to incapacitate the United States Navy and establish Japanese supremacy in the Pacific. Japan's aggressive expansionism would ultimately lead to fierce battles throughout the region, as Allied forces sought to counter their advances and restore balance. The Allied powers, on the other hand, developed their military strategies in response to the Axis threats. The formation of alliances, such as the British and American Partnership, was crucial in coordinating efforts against common enemies. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in 1944 exemplified the importance of strategic planning and collaboration among Allied forces, showcasing their commitment to reclaiming occupied territories. This strategic unity was essential in turning the tide of the war, as it allowed for a more formidable opposition against the Axis powers. Ultimately, the military strategies and objectives that characterized the early stages of World War II were marked by innovation and adaptability. Each nation employed tactics that reflected their unique circumstances, ambitions, and historical contexts. As the war progressed, these strategies evolved, leading to a conflict that would reshape the world order and leave lasting echoes in the annals of history. Chapter 5. The Invasion of Poland. Blitzkrieg Tactics. Blitzkrieg tactics, a term that translates to lightning war, revolutionized the battlefield during World War II. These strategies were characterized by rapid, coordinated assaults involving air and ground forces. The primary objective was to surprise and overwhelm the enemy, making it difficult for them to react effectively. This approach was not only innovative but also demonstrated the effectiveness of modern technology and mobility in warfare, setting a new standard for military operations. At the heart of Blitzkrieg was the integration of various military components. Tanks, aircraft, and infantry units worked in unison to break through enemy lines swiftly. The use of armored divisions allowed for quick penetration into enemy territory, while air support provided essential cover and disrupted supply lines. This orchestration of force was a stark departure from the static trench warfare of World War I and marked a significant evolution in military doctrine. The first major implementation of Blitzkrieg tactics was during the invasion of Poland in 1939. German forces executed a rapid offensive that caught Polish troops off guard, leading to a swift victory. The success in Poland was a testament to the effectiveness of these tactics, as it showcased the ability to achieve quick and decisive results. This initial triumph inspired further military campaigns across Europe, highlighting the profound impact of Blitzkrieg on the early stages of World War II. As the war progressed, Blitzkrieg tactics were employed in various theaters, including France and the Soviet Union. The fall of France in 1940 exemplified the devastating effectiveness of this strategy, where German forces bypassed heavily fortified positions and struck at the heart of French defenses. The rapidity of these victories not only demoralized enemy forces but also instilled a sense of invincibility within the German military, further fueling their aggressive expansion. However, the limitations of Blitzkrieg tactics became apparent as the war continued. The prolonged conflict in the Soviet Union revealed the challenges of sustaining such rapid advances over vast territories. Despite its initial successes, the overextension of supply lines and the resilience of the Soviet forces ultimately led to setbacks for the Germans. By analyzing these outcomes, it becomes clear that while Blitzkrieg tactics were revolutionary, they were not without their vulnerabilities, shaping the narrative of World War II as it unfolded. The role of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union played a pivotal role in the events leading up to World War II, influencing both the political landscape of Europe and the strategies employed by various nations. In the years preceding the war, the Soviet leadership under Joseph Stalin sought to expand its influence, often through alliances and agreements that would later shape the course of the conflict. The signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany exemplified this strategy, allowing both countries to divide Eastern Europe between them and effectively neutralizing the threat of a two-front war for Hitler at that moment. As the war commenced, the Soviet Union's initial position was one of non-belligerence, bolstered by the aforementioned pact. This allowed Germany to launch its invasion of Poland without fear of Soviet intervention, leading to the rapid fall of the Polish state. However, this agreement was not to last, as both powers had competing interests in the region, leading to inevitable conflict. The invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany in June 1941, known as Operation Barbarossa, marked a significant turning point in the war, drawing the USSR into the conflict as a key player. The Soviet Union's entry into World War II transformed the dynamics of the conflict. With its vast resources and manpower, the Red Army became a formidable force against the Axis powers. The brutal fighting on the Eastern Front resulted in staggering losses for both sides, but it was the resilience of the Soviet people and their military that ultimately turned the tide. Key battles, such as Stalingrad and Kursk, showcase the determination of the Soviet forces and their ability to withstand and repel German advances. In addition to military contributions, the Soviet Union's role in the war also had profound political implications. The defeat of Nazi Germany allowed the USSR to emerge as a superpower in the post-war world, fundamentally altering the balance of power. The ideological divide that followed, marked by the onset of the Cold War, can be traced back to the Soviet Union's pivotal involvement in World War II. This highlighted the complexities of alliances and the shifting nature of power during and after the conflict. In summary, the Soviet Union's role in World War II was not merely a matter of military engagement. It was also about strategic maneuvering in the political arena. The choices made by Soviet leaders had lasting effects on the war's progression and the subsequent geopolitical landscape of Europe. Understanding this role is crucial for grasping how the war began and eventually reshaped the world order. Global reactions. The reactions to the events leading up to World War II were as varied as the nations involved. After the Treaty of Versailles imposed severe restrictions on Germany, many Germans felt humiliated and oppressed, leading to a surge in nationalist sentiments. This atmosphere of resentment provided fertile ground for Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Other countries, particularly those in Europe, observed these developments with a mix of concern and disbelief, struggling to understand the implications of Germany's aggressive posturing. In Britain and France, the policy of appeasement dominated the political landscape. Leaders believed that conceding to some of Hitler's demands might prevent another catastrophic conflict, as memories of the First World War were still fresh. This strategy, however, was met with criticism from various sectors, including military leaders and some politicians who argued that it only encouraged further aggression. The failure to confront Hitler early on would have dire consequences for Europe as the war approached. Across the Atlantic, the United States maintained a policy of isolationism, largely influenced by the prevailing sentiment among the American public. Many Americans were reluctant to engage in a conflict that seemed distant and unrelated to their own struggles during the Great Depression. Nevertheless, as news of the escalating violence in Europe reached American shores, there began to be a gradual shift in public opinion towards supporting the Allies, especially after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Meanwhile, countries in Eastern Europe faced their own challenges in response to the growing threat. Nations like Poland were caught between the ambitions of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, leading to a precarious existence. The signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 shocked many, as it demonstrated a temporary alliance between two ideological foes, further complicating the landscape of international relations. The reactions of these nations were often rooted in survival, as they prepared for the inevitable conflict. As tensions mounted, the global community began to grapple with the reality of a Second World War. International organizations attempted to mediate and resolve disputes, but their efforts were largely ineffective against the backdrop of nationalist fervor and militarism. The culmination of these global reactions formed a complex tapestry of fear, hope, and eventual conflict, setting the stage for one of the most devastating wars in human history. Chapter 6. The Fall of France. The Maginot Line. The Maginot Line, named after French Minister of War André Maginot, was an ambitious defense line constructed by France in the 1920s and 1930s. Designed to protect France from a potential German invasion, it spanned the eastern borders, featuring a series of fortifications, bunkers, and obstacles. This monumental project aimed to provide a sense of security and deter aggressors, reflecting the trauma of World War I and the desire for peace in the interwar period. However, the Maginot Line had significant limitations, most notably its geographical constraints. It ran along the French-German border but left the expanse of the Ardennes forest unprotected. This oversight would prove catastrophic when, in 1940, German forces executed a surprise invasion through Belgium, effectively bypassing the formidable fortifications. The reliance on static defenses became evident, as the line could not adapt to the rapid changes in warfare that characterized World War II. The psychological impact of the Maginot Line was profound. While it instilled confidence among French citizens and military leaders, it also created a false sense of security that blinded them to the evolving nature of military strategy. The French High Command believed that the line would hold, leading to a lack of preparedness for mobile warfare. This miscalculation had devastating consequences during the Battle of France, where the German blitzkrieg overwhelmed French forces with speed and efficiency. In retrospect, the Maginot Line symbolizes the failures of static defense in the face of modern warfare. Its construction represented a significant investment of resources, yet its ineffectiveness highlighted the inadequacies of military dogma that failed to evolve. The line stands as a testament to the misinterpretation of lessons learned from World War I, ultimately contributing to France's rapid defeat in World War II. Ultimately, the legacy of the Maginot Line extends beyond its physical structure. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-reliance on fortifications and the importance of adaptability in military strategy. As nations reflect on the lessons of the past, the Maginot Line reminds us that preparedness requires more than walls and bunkers. It demands an understanding of the unpredictable nature of conflict and the need for continual evolution in defense tactics. The Dunkirk evacuation. The Dunkirk evacuation, known as Operation Dynamo, marked a pivotal moment in the early stages of World War II. In May 1940, Allied forces found themselves encircled by German troops along the French coastline. The situation was dire, with approximately 400,000 British and French soldiers stranded at Dunkirk, cut off from retreat by the advancing enemy. This led to a frantic effort to orchestrate a mass evacuation under perilous conditions, as the Luftwaffe relentlessly bombed the area, targeting both the troops and the evacuation efforts. The British government, under Prime Minister Winston Churchill, called upon civilian vessels to assist in the enormous task of evacuation. This unprecedented appeal saw hundreds of small boats, fishing vessels, and pleasure crafts converge on the beaches of Dunkirk. The bravery of these civilian sailors, alongside the military personnel, played a crucial role in the success of the operation. Their collective efforts allowed for the evacuation of over 338,000 soldiers in just 9 days, turning a potential disaster into a remarkable rescue. Despite the success of the evacuation, the Dunkirk operation was not without its challenges. Many soldiers were left behind, and the loss of heavy equipment and vehicles was significant. The retreat was a bitter pill to swallow for the Allies, as it highlighted the severity of their situation and the formidable strength of the German blitzkrieg. However, the successful evacuation also served to boost morale and provided a glimmer of hope for the Allied forces in the face of adversity. Dunkirk's legacy extends beyond the immediate rescue. It became a symbol of resilience and determination. The phrase Dunkirk spirit emerged, encapsulating the bravery and camaraderie displayed by both military personnel and civilians. This spirit would be crucial in the years that followed, as the Allies regrouped and prepared for further confrontations with Axis powers. The evacuation was a turning point, demonstrating that defeat could be transformed into a rallying cry for continued resistance. In retrospect, the Dunkirk evacuation was not merely a military operation. It was a defining moment in the narrative of World War II. It highlighted the importance of unity and the unyielding human spirit in times of crisis. As the Allies prepared for the long conflict ahead, the lessons learned from Dunkirk would shape their strategies and resolve, ultimately contributing to the eventual victory over tyranny in Europe. The impact on British resolve. The impact of World War II on British resolve was profound and far-reaching, shaping not only the nation's military strategies but also its social fabric. At the onset of the war, Britain faced the daunting challenge of rallying its populace to support a prolonged conflict against the Axis powers. The sense of urgency was palpable, as the threat of invasion loomed large and the resilience of the British people was put to the test. As the war progressed, moments of adversity, such as the Blitz, served to galvanize the British spirit. The nightly bombings of London and other cities could have shattered morale, yet instead, they fostered a deep sense of unity and determination among citizens. This shared experience of hardship led to the rise of iconic symbols of British tenacity, exemplified by figures like Winston Churchill, whose stirring speeches bolstered public confidence and reinforced the commitment to fight on. The war also had significant implications for British society, as it necessitated a shift in roles and responsibilities across the nation. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking on roles that had traditionally been held by men. This transformation not only contributed to the war effort but also laid the groundwork for post-war societal change, highlighting the capabilities and rights of women in a way that had not been previously acknowledged. Moreover, the impact on British resolve extended to the colonial territories, where the war sparked a wave of nationalism and calls for independence. The contributions of colonial troops and resources were crucial to the British war effort, yet they also ignited aspirations for self-determination. This complex dynamic ultimately altered the relationship between Britain and its colonies, leading to a re-evaluation of imperial policies in the aftermath of the war. In conclusion, the impact of World War II on British resolve was not merely about military strength, but encompassed a broader transformation of national identity and societal structure. The war forged a collective spirit that endured beyond the conflict, influencing Britain's role on the global stage for decades to come. The lessons learned during this tumultuous period continue to resonate, serving as a reminder of the resilience and fortitude that emerged from the ashes of war. Chapter 7. The Battle of Britain. The Blitz and Civilian Resilience. During World War II, the Blitz marked a significant and harrowing chapter in the history of Britain, as German bombers unleashed a relentless campaign of aerial bombardment against civilian targets. From September 1940 to May 1941, cities such as London, Coventry, and Liverpool were subjected to nightly raids that aimed not only to destroy infrastructure but also to instill fear and demoralize the population. The destruction was immense, leaving many families homeless and entire neighborhoods in ruins. Yet, amidst the chaos, a remarkable story of resilience emerged from the British people. The civilian response to the Blitz was characterized by an unwavering spirit and a determination to support the war effort. Air raid shelters became a common sight in gardens and public spaces, providing refuge from the nightly terror. Community initiatives sprang up, with neighbors banding together to help one another cope with the devastation. The British government also played a role, encouraging citizens to remain calm and continue with their daily lives, which helped to foster a sense of unity and collective strength. Despite the dangers, many people displayed extraordinary courage by volunteering for civil defense roles, including firefighters and rescue workers. These individuals faced great risks, often returning to smoldering ruins to save lives and recover the dead. The stories of heroism and sacrifice during this time became woven into the national narrative, showcasing the best of human spirit in the face of adversity. Such acts of bravery not only bolstered morale but also provided a sense of purpose in a time of uncertainty. Cultural expressions during the Blitz reflected the resilience of the British people. Music, theatre, and literature often conveyed themes of hope and defiance, serving as a balm for the collective trauma experienced. The iconic song, "We'll Meet Again," became a symbol of hope, resonating with those who longed for reunion with loved ones separated by war. The arts played a crucial role in maintaining morale and reminding citizens of their strength and unity. In retrospect, the Blitz can be seen as a crucible that shaped modern British identity. The resilience exhibited by civilians not only contributed to the war effort, but also laid the groundwork for a post-war society that valued community and solidarity. The lessons learned during this dark chapter have echoed through the years, reminding us of the capacity for strength and unity in the face of overwhelming challenges. The Blitz, while a time of great suffering, ultimately highlighted the indomitable spirit of a nation. Technological advancements in warfare. The evolution of technology during the early 20th century had a profound impact on warfare, effectively reshaping the dynamics of conflict and military strategy. Innovations such as tanks, aircraft, and mechanized infantry began to emerge, marking a significant departure from traditional trench warfare. These advancements not only increased the lethality of battles but also introduced new tactics that could be employed by both sides. As nations prepared for what would become World War II, the integration of technology into military operations became paramount. The introduction of tanks in World War I heralded a new era in ground combat. By the time World War II erupted, these armored vehicles had undergone significant improvements, becoming faster and more effective on the battlefield. Their ability to break through enemy lines and engage in rapid maneuvers made them crucial for offensive strategies. The German Blitzkrieg, characterized by swift and coordinated attacks, showcased the effectiveness of tank warfare and highlighted the importance of mechanization in modern conflict. Aerial warfare also transformed significantly during this period, with the development of more advanced aircraft that could carry out both reconnaissance and bombing missions. Fighters and bombers became staples of military operations, allowing nations to strike from above and gather intelligence on enemy movements. The Battle of Britain demonstrated the critical role of air superiority, as the Royal Air Force defended against the Luftwaffe, showcasing the strategic necessity of technological advancements in aviation. Naval warfare saw similar advancements, particularly with the rise of aircraft carriers and submarines. The ability to project air power from the sea changed naval engagements, enabling forces to engage in battles far from their home shores. The attack on Pearl Harbor exemplified how technological innovation could shift the balance of power in a matter of moments, leading to significant shifts in naval strategy and tactics throughout the war. In conclusion, the technological advancements in warfare prior to and during World War II not only changed the landscape of battle but also influenced the geopolitical strategies of nations. These innovations laid the groundwork for future conflicts and established a new standard in military operations that would have lasting effects. The interplay between technology and warfare during this period illustrates how critical advancements can alter the course of history, shaping the very fabric of global relations and conflicts. The shift in strategy. The interwar years marked a significant shift in military and political strategies that would ultimately lay the groundwork for World War II. Countries that had once been allies in the Great War began to adopt approaches that contradicted the principles of cooperation and diplomacy. The rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan signified a departure from traditional warfare strategies towards aggressive expansionism. Each nation sought to assert its dominance through militarization and imperial ambitions, leading to an environment ripe for conflict. In Germany, Adolf Hitler's ascension to power brought forth a new, aggressive foreign policy based on the idea of Lebensraum, or living space. This concept justified the invasion of neighboring territories as a means of securing resources and land for the expanding German population. Hitler's strategy was not merely reactive. It was a calculated move to challenge the post-World War I order established by the Treaty of Versailles. The shift in strategy was evident as Germany withdrew from disarmament agreements and ramped up military production, signaling its intent to confront its perceived adversaries. Meanwhile, Italy, under Benito Mussolini, embarked on a campaign to restore the glory of the Roman Empire. Mussolini's ambitions led to military incursions in Africa and the Balkans, as he sought to expand Italian influence and territory. This aggressive posturing was a direct challenge to the European powers that had previously contained Italy's expansionist desires. The alignment of fascist ideologies between Germany and Italy further solidified a mutual understanding that would have dire consequences for Europe. Across the globe, Japan too was revisiting its military strategies as it sought to become a dominant power in Asia. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 highlighted Japan's willingness to use military force in pursuit of its imperial ambitions. The shift in strategy from isolationism to aggressive expansion was driven by a need for resources and an ideology that glorified military strength. Japan's actions prompted international condemnation but also signaled a growing tension that would eventually escalate into a broader conflict with Western powers. The combination of these shifts in strategy across Europe and Asia created a volatile atmosphere that culminated in the outbreak of World War II. Countries that once sought peace found themselves embroiled in a cycle of aggression and retaliation. The lessons of the interwar years reveal how the failure to address the ambitions of totalitarian regimes and the changing nature of warfare contributed to the ignition of one of history's most devastating conflicts. As nations recalibrated their strategies, the echoes of past conflicts resonated, paving the way for the future turmoil that was to come. Chapter 8. The Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, launched on the 22nd of June, 1941, marked a pivotal moment in World War II as Nazi Germany sought to invade the Soviet Union. This ambitious military campaign was driven by Adolf Hitler's desire for Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. The operation aimed to defeat the Soviet forces swiftly and capture key cities, including Moscow and Leningrad, in a bid to secure dominance in Eastern Europe. The scale of the invasion was unprecedented, involving millions of troops and thousands of tanks and aircraft, making it one of the largest military operations in history. The initial phase of Operation Barbarossa saw remarkable success for the German Wehrmacht. The blitzkrieg tactics employed by the Germans allowed them to advance rapidly, encircling and decimating Soviet troops in vast numbers. Within weeks, the Germans had captured significant territory, raising hopes in Berlin that a quick victory was achievable. However, the campaign soon encountered logistical challenges and fierce resistance from the Red Army, which began to regroup and adapt its strategies in response to the German onslaught. As the invasion progressed, the harsh Russian winter set in, presenting further obstacles for the German forces. Temperatures plummeted, and supply lines became strained, hampering the effectiveness of the German army. The Soviets, bolstered by their resilience and determination, launched counter-offensives that pushed the Germans back from key positions. This shift in momentum highlighted the underestimated strength of the Soviet Union and the severe miscalculations made by the Nazi leadership. Operation Barbarossa ultimately failed to achieve its primary objectives, leading to a protracted conflict on the Eastern Front that would become one of the deadliest theaters of war in history. The campaign not only resulted in staggering military losses but also marked a turning point in the war, galvanizing Allied efforts against the Axis powers. The failure of the operation illustrated the limitations of the German military strategy and foreshadowed the eventual downfall of the Third Reich. The repercussions of Operation Barbarossa extended far beyond the battlefield. It set the stage for the brutal warfare that would characterize the Eastern Front, with immense suffering for both soldiers and civilians alike. The devastation wrought by this campaign is a reminder of the human cost of war and the complexities of global conflict. Understanding the implications of Operation Barbarossa is essential to grasping how World War II unfolded and reshaped the world we live in today. The Siege of Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad stands as one of the most harrowing episodes of World War II, illustrating the brutal realities of warfare and human endurance. Beginning in September 1941, the city was encircled by German forces, cutting off all supply routes and trapping its inhabitants in a desperate situation. This blockade would last for nearly 900 days, leading to severe shortages of food, fuel, and medical supplies, which would have devastating effects on the civilian population. Turning points in the East. The East during the early 20th century was a landscape marked by tension and instability, setting the stage for significant turning points that would lead to World War II. In particular, the rise of militaristic regimes in Japan and the expansionist ambitions of the Soviet Union played pivotal roles in escalating conflict across the region. These nations were not only seeking to assert their dominance but were also reacting to the perceived threats from Western powers, which added layers of complexity to the geopolitical situation. Japan's aggressive expansion into China is often regarded as one of the critical events that marked the beginning of hostilities in the East. The invasion of Manchuria in 1931 showcased Japan's imperial ambitions and effectively demonstrated its willingness to resort to military force to achieve its objectives. This act of aggression was met with international condemnation, yet it also highlighted the failures of the League of Nations, which proved ineffective in curbing Japan's expansionist policies and set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts. Simultaneously, the Soviet Union was under the leadership of Joseph Stalin, whose policies were driven by a mix of paranoia and ambition. The signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939 between the Soviets and Nazis was a shocking turning point that illustrated the complexities of alliances in the lead up to the war. This non-aggression treaty not only allowed Germany to invade Poland without fear of Soviet intervention but also exposed the fragility of Eastern European security as nations struggled to navigate the treacherous waters of shifting allegiances. The struggles in the East were further exacerbated by the internal dynamics within countries like China, where the civil war between the nationalists and communists created an atmosphere of chaos. This internal discord made it easier for foreign powers to exploit the situation, as seen in the Japanese invasion. The lack of unity among Chinese factions weakened their resistance against external threats, ultimately contributing to a broader confrontation that would engulf the region and the world. As these turning points unfolded, the East became a microcosm of the larger conflicts brewing globally. The decisions made by leaders in Japan, the Soviet Union, and China not only shaped their national destinies but also set the stage for the catastrophic events of World War II. Understanding these pivotal moments is crucial for comprehending how the echoes of the past reverberated through history, igniting a conflict that would alter the course of nations. Chapter 9. The War Expands. The Attack on Pearl Harbor. The attack on Pearl Harbor, which occurred on the 7th of December, 1941, marked a pivotal moment in world history, dramatically changing the course of World War II. The surprise military strike by the Imperial Japanese Navy aimed to incapacitate the United States Pacific Fleet, thereby preventing interference with Japanese military operations in Southeast Asia. This unprovoked assault led to significant casualties and the destruction of numerous ships and aircraft, awakening the American public to the reality of war on their doorstep. In the early hours of that fateful Sunday morning, the skies over Pearl Harbor were filled with Japanese planes launched from 6 aircraft carriers. The meticulously planned operation took the United States by surprise, as diplomatic negotiations were ongoing, and many believed that an attack was unlikely. The bombings targeted battleships, airfields, and other military installations, resulting in staggering losses that would take years to recover from. The aftermath of Pearl Harbor was immediate and profound. The United States, which had maintained a policy of isolationism, found itself united in outrage and a desire for revenge. President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress the following day, famously declaring it a date which will live in infamy. This rallying cry mobilized the nation and led to a formal declaration of war against Japan, marking the United States' entry into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor not only transformed American public opinion but also reshaped military strategies in the Pacific theater of war. The loss of battleships was a devastating blow, yet it also prompted a swift adaptation in naval tactics, leading to the increased importance of aircraft carriers. This shift would play a critical role in subsequent battles, such as the pivotal Battle of Midway, where the United States began to turn the tide against Japan. Ultimately, the attack on Pearl Harbor served as a catalyst for global conflict, drawing in nations and altering alliances. It underscored the unpredictability of war and the extent to which strategic planning can be upended by sudden action. The echoes of this event resonate through history, reminding us of the fragility of peace and the dire consequences of military aggression. Global alliances form. The aftermath of World War I set the stage for a complex web of alliances that would ultimately contribute to the ignition of World War II. In the years following the Treaty of Versailles, many nations felt the weight of economic hardship and national humiliation. The dissatisfaction with the treaty's terms fostered a climate ripe for political extremism, as countries sought both security and power through strategic alliances. This period saw the emergence of fascist regimes in Italy and Germany, which would play significant roles in the conflict that was to come. As these totalitarian states rose to prominence, they began forming allegiances that would reshape the global political landscape. The Axis powers, consisting primarily of Germany, Italy, and Japan, were united by their mutual interests in territorial expansion and a desire to overturn the post-World War I order. Their cooperation was marked by a series of treaties and agreements, which enabled them to bolster their military capabilities and assert their influence across Europe and Asia. This alliance not only posed a threat to neighboring nations but also challenged the existing balance of power that had been established in the aftermath of the Great War. In response to the growing threat posed by the Axis, countries such as France and Britain began to seek their own alliances to counteract the aggressive expansionism. The formation of the Allies was characterized by a diverse coalition of nations, including the United States, the Soviet Union, and China, each with its distinct motivations and goals. This collective effort was crucial in uniting various political ideologies against a common adversary, demonstrating that the threat of fascism could galvanize disparate groups into a singular force. The shifting allegiances and the strategic partnerships formed during this period highlight the precarious nature of international relations in the interwar years. Diplomatic negotiations often took place in a climate of distrust, as nations scrambled to secure their own interests while facing the encroaching menace of fascism. These alliances were not merely a product of ideological alignment, they were deeply influenced by historical grievances and the desire for revenge against perceived injustices from World War I. Ultimately, the formation of global alliances in the lead-up to World War II underscores the interconnectedness of nations and the complex motivations that drive them together or apart. As tensions escalated and diplomatic efforts failed, these alliances would play a crucial role in determining the course of the war. The alliances forged during this tumultuous time serve as a reminder of how past conflicts can shape future relationships, and the potential for history to repeat itself if lessons are not learned. The impact on colonial territories. The impact of World War II on colonial territories was profound and far-reaching, reshaping the political landscape and altering the course of history in many regions. As European powers were drawn into the war, their colonies became critical sources of resources and manpower, significantly influencing how colonial administrations operated. Colonies were often thrust into the conflict, serving as bases for military operations and supplying troops to fight on behalf of their colonial rulers. This involvement marked a turning point in the relationship between colonizers and the colonized, as the realities of war exposed the vulnerabilities of imperial powers. In many territories, the war spurred nationalist movements that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. The need for local support during the war led colonial governments to make concessions, granting greater autonomy or initiating political reforms. This shift fostered a sense of unity among colonized people, who began to demand independence more vocally. The war also highlighted the contradictions inherent in colonial rule, as the fight against fascism was juxtaposed with the oppression faced by colonized populations. The economic ramifications of World War II on colonial territories were equally significant. Many colonies experienced disruptions to their agricultural and industrial activities due to the demands of war. Additionally, the post-war period saw a decline in traditional colonial economies as global markets changed, leading to increased unrest and dissatisfaction among local populations. This economic instability often served as a catalyst for decolonization movements, as people sought to reclaim control over their resources and economic futures. The social fabric of colonial territories was also transformed during and after the war. The return of soldiers from the front lines brought with it new ideas about freedom and self-determination, which further ignited nationalist sentiments. As returning veterans shared their experiences, they inspired others to challenge the status quo and strive for equality and justice. This cultural exchange played a crucial role in fostering a collective identity among disparate groups within the colonies, uniting them in their quest for independence. Ultimately, the impact of World War II on colonial territories was a significant factor in the decline of empires and the rise of independent nations. The war acted as a catalyst for change, accelerating processes that had previously been slow and fraught with resistance. As former colonies navigated the complex transition to independence, the echoes of the past continued to shape their political landscapes, reminding us of the intricate connections between global conflict and local aspirations for freedom. Chapter 10. The Aftermath and Lessons Learned. The Nuremberg Trials. The Nuremberg Trials stand as a monumental moment in history, marking the first time that international law was applied to hold individuals accountable for war crimes. Established in the aftermath of World War II, these trials sought justice for the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. The trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany, a city that had been a center of Nazi propaganda, making it a poignant backdrop for such a significant event in legal history. The proceedings began in November 1945 and lasted until October 1946, during which 24 major war criminals were prosecuted. The defendants included high-ranking military officials, political leaders, and prominent figures in the Nazi Party. The trials were not merely about punishing the guilty, they also aimed to establish a precedent for future international law, reinforcing the principle that individuals, including heads of state, could be held liable for their actions during wartime. One of the key features of the Nuremberg trials was the introduction of the concept of crimes against humanity. This term was pivotal in categorizing the systematic extermination of millions of Jews and others deemed undesirable by the Nazis. The trials also highlighted the importance of evidence-based justice, as the prosecution presented extensive documentation and testimonies that detailed the horrific actions taken during the Holocaust and other war crimes. Despite their significance, the Nuremberg trials were not without controversy. Critics argued that the trials were victor's justice, as they were conducted by the Allied powers who had emerged victorious from the war. Furthermore, some defendants claimed that they were not afforded a fair trial, leading to debates about the legitimacy of the proceedings and the application of international law. Nevertheless, the trials laid the groundwork for future tribunals and the establishment of the International Criminal Court. In conclusion, the Nuremberg trials represented a pivotal shift in the pursuit of justice following World War II. They brought to light the necessity of holding individuals accountable for heinous acts, and established a framework for international law that continues to influence global justice systems today. The legacy of the Nuremberg trials remains relevant as it serves as a reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the enduring quest for justice in the face of such darkness. Redrawing national boundaries. The aftermath of World War I set the stage for significant changes in national boundaries across Europe and beyond. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, aimed to establish peace but inadvertently sowed seeds of discontent. New nations emerged while others were dismembered, leading to a complex patchwork of territories that often disregarded ethnic and cultural identities. This reconfiguration created tensions that would resonate throughout the interwar years and ultimately contribute to the outbreak of World War II. One of the most notable examples of boundary redrawing was the creation of Poland from territories previously controlled by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. This newly formed nation was intended to provide a homeland for Polish people, yet the boundaries established were often contentious. Significant German and Ukrainian populations found themselves within Polish borders, leading to friction and resentment. Such territorial disputes laid the groundwork for nationalist fervor and ambitions that would ignite conflict in the 1930s. In addition to Poland, the Balkans experienced a tumultuous reshaping of boundaries. The dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire resulted in new nation-states, including Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. However, these new entities were often artificial constructs, combining disparate ethnic groups with historical grievances. The failure to address these underlying tensions allowed nationalism to flourish, as different groups sought autonomy or dominance, further destabilizing the region and creating ripe conditions for war. The League of Nations emerged as a conceptual framework to manage these complex national boundaries and prevent future conflicts. However, its effectiveness was severely limited by the lack of participation from major powers, notably the United States. As the League struggled to settle disputes and enforce its resolutions, countries began to pursue their own interests aggressively, often at the expense of their neighbors. This erosion of international cooperation contributed to the deterioration of the geopolitical landscape in the lead-up to World War II. As the 1930s progressed, the grievances stemming from these boundary changes became increasingly pronounced. Aggressive territorial ambitions from nations like Germany, Italy, and Japan were fueled by a desire to rectify what they viewed as historical injustices. The redrawing of national boundaries, rather than fostering peace, had instead exacerbated tensions, leading to a volatile environment that would ultimately culminate in the outbreak of World War II. The echoes of these past decisions continue to resonate in modern geopolitics, reminding us of the fragile nature of national boundaries. The legacy of World War II. The legacy of World War II is vast and multifaceted, shaping the world in ways that are still felt today. The conflict not only redrew the political map of Europe, but also established the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, leading to a bipolar world order that defined the latter half of the 20th century. This shift in power dynamics significantly influenced international relations and set the stage for the Cold War, which would dominate global politics for decades. Moreover, World War II had profound social and cultural impacts. The war effort catalyzed changes in gender roles, with women entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers, leading to long-lasting shifts in societal norms. Additionally, the horrors of the Holocaust and other wartime atrocities prompted a global reckoning with human rights, culminating in the establishment of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Economically, the aftermath of the war saw massive reconstruction efforts, particularly in Europe, through initiatives such as the Marshall Plan. This not only helped rebuild war-torn nations but also fostered economic cooperation and integration, eventually leading to the formation of the European Union. The economic principles established during this period continue to influence global trade and economic policies today. The war also left a legacy of technological and military advancements. The development of nuclear weapons during the conflict ushered in a new era of warfare and international relations, characterized by deterrence and the constant threat of nuclear conflict. Furthermore, innovations in various fields, from aviation to medicine, were accelerated by wartime needs, laying the groundwork for future technological progress. In conclusion, the legacy of World War II is a complex tapestry of political, social, economic, and technological threads that have shaped the modern world. Understanding this legacy is crucial for grasping current global dynamics and the historical context of contemporary conflicts. As we reflect on this period, we are reminded of the lessons learned and the importance of striving for peace and cooperation in an interconnected world.